In 1964, a Ferrari was beaten by a Pontiac. At least, that's what the world was told. Headlines screamed, sales exploded, a legend was born. But what shocked insiders wasn't the speed. It was the secret hidden under the hood. This wasn't a 389. It was an illegal 421, disguised. For 34 years, the truth was buried behind badges and press releases. This is the hidden origin of America's muscle car, and the lie that lit the fuse, the early 1960s. General Motors ruled, Detroit like an empire. And like every empire, it had strict rules. One of those rules was ironclad. No mid-size car was to carry an engine bigger than 330 cubic inches. It was corporate law, meant to keep insurance rates down and sibling rivalry in check. But Pontiac had other ideas. The division had tasted victory on NASCAR ovals and NHRA drag strips, and its engineers were restless. Leading them was a tall, sharp-suited engineer named John DeLorean, brilliant, maverick, and never afraid to bend a rule or break it. Alongside him stood Jim Wangers, Pontiac's advertising mastermind. Wangers knew how to sell speed and how to stage a show, and then, in the shadows, Royal Pontiac of Michigan. A dealership that was more than a dealership. It was Pontiac's back door to the underground of performance. Together, they created a loophole, a package that dropped Pontiac's biggest available engine, the 389 cubic inch V8, into its mid-size, Tempest. With 3 carburetors, up to 348 horsepower, and a curb weight barely over 3,200 pounds, the car was cheap, fast, and rebellious. For under $3,000, anyone could buy speed once reserved for the racetrack. But Pontiac's GTO project wasn't legal. It defied GM's corporate order. And John DeLorean knew it. He gambled that the executives in Detroit would look the other way if the sales rolled in. It was a gamble that would ignite a revolution. And to light the match, Pontiac turned to deception. What came next would not just bend the rules of Detroit. It would rewrite the rules of American car culture forever. In 1964, Pontiac's ad man Jim Wangers pitched a test to Car and Driver magazine, a bold showdown between Detroit's new GTO and Italy's Ferrari GTO. Ferrari's GTO was a $1 million thoroughbred. Pontiac's was a $3,000 upstart. On paper, the matchup seemed absurd, but Wangers knew exactly what he was doing. What Car and Driver didn't know was that Pontiac had stacked the deck. Wangers quietly prepared not 1, but 2 special cars. At Royal Pontiac, cars the public could never buy. Under the hood, the standard 389 was gone. In its place, Pontiac's most feared weapon, the 421 Super Duty. A 421 cubic inch monster, illegal for street use, was disguised to look like a factory 389. Even the engine codes were scrubbed. It was deception by design. Royal Pontiac mechanics gave the engine their secret Bobcat treatment. On paper, it was still a 389. In reality, it was a time bomb disguised as stock. The 2 GTOs were shipped to Daytona. Car and Driver's editors, thinking they were testing production cars, strapped in. The stopwatch told a different story. 0 to 60 in 4.6 seconds, a quarter mile in just 12.8. Numbers so outrageous, they rivaled Ferrari, Aston Martin, and Maserati. In print, the Pontiac GTO looked faster than the Ferrari itself. When the article hit newsstands, readers were stunned. Pontiac's sales office had predicted maybe 5,000 buyers for the GTO. After Car and Driver's story, demand exploded. By the end of 1964, Pontiac had sold over 32,000 GTOs. The car became an instant cultural icon. But here's the truth. No showroom GTO could match those numbers. A stock 389 ran 0 to 60 in 7.7 seconds, and the quarter in the mid-15s. Respectable, but nowhere near Ferrari territory. The car and Driver tested wasn't the same one you could buy on the lot. It was a ringer built to deceive. Pontiac, the gamble paid off. Sales soared. The GTO became legend. But behind the smoke and chrome, a darker story was brewing. What Pontiac unleashed terrified even General Motors itself and set off a corporate war. The engine at the heart of the deception was no ordinary V8. It was Pontiac's 421 Super Duty, an engine so powerful, so feared, that even NASCAR banned it from competition. Officially rated at just over 400 horsepower, insiders knew the 421 could make far more. With Super Duty parts, it dominated the drag strip, humiliating rivals from Ford, Dodge, and Chevrolet. Inside General Motors, Pontiac's success was causing panic. The company's own divisions were competing against each other, and Pontiac's growing dominance was threatening Chevrolet's crown as GM's golden child. Chevrolet executives were furious. Their Corvettes and SS models were being outshined by Pontiac DeLorean, and his engineers had outsmarted corporate policy with the GTO. But in doing so, they painted a target on Pontiac's back. In 1963, GM had already issued a corporate ban on factory-backed racing. Officially, this was to appear responsible amid rising insurance rates and safety concerns. Unofficially, it was aimed directly at Pontiac. Pontiac's 421 Super Duty program was killed. Engines were rounded up. Many were stamped with the words, "Property of GM, destroy," and sent to the crusher. Some were saved, hidden away by engineers who refused to let the legend die. But the message was clear. Pontiac's rise would not be allowed to continue unchecked. Even with corporate sabotage, the GTO was unstoppable. Buyers lined up. Dealers couldn't keep cars in stock. By 1965, Pontiac was selling more than 75,000 GTOs. But behind the curtain, GM executives continued tightening the noose, issuing orders to tone down Pontiac's racing image and to keep the GTO looking like just another option package, not a factory-backed racer. John DeLorean didn't care. For him, breaking rules wasn't the problem. It was the point. And the GTO proved he could get away with it. But the same maverick spirit that birthed the GTO would one day lead him into darker territory, ending with a federal courtroom and a cocaine trafficking scandal. Pontiac had lit the fuse. But to keep the flame alive, they needed one more deception, a secret that wouldn't come to light for 34 years. For decades, Jim Wangers carried the burden, the lie that launched a revolution, until in 1998, he finally told the truth. For more than 3 decades, Jim Wangers never breathed a word of the truth. To the public, the car and driver test car was a stock GTO. To Pontiac, it was marketing genius. And to Wangers himself, it was a burden. Wangers lived with that secret for 34 years. The deception had worked. The GTO had sold. The muscle car era had exploded. But deep down, he knew history had been built on a lie. Until one day in 1998, he finally confessed. He admitted that the GTO sent to Car and Driver wasn't stock, that under its hood was a 421 Super Duty, disguised as a 389, that the timing, compression, carburetors, everything had been altered to deliver a fantasy performance. The legend had been born of deception. But here's the most shocking part. The original Car and Driver test car still exists. Owned today by collector Tenny Fairchild, it remains one of the most valuable Pontiacs on Earth. And inside, the evidence, a date-coded 421 block, proving Wangers' confession beyond doubt. Car and Driver claimed they knew about certain modifications, the carburetors, the tuning. But they insisted they had no idea the engine itself wasn't stock. Whether that's true remains controversial to this day. What can't be denied is the impact. That single test set off a chain reaction. Ford rushed out the Mustang GT. Chevrolet developed the Chevelle SS. Dodge answered with the Charger. The muscle car wars had begun. Without that deception, the muscle car era might never have happened. The test car's numbers lit a fire that spread across Detroit, shaping a generation of cars and of culture. But what could a real 1964 GTO actually do? And how did Royal Pontiac's Bobcat kits turn showroom cars into street terrors? Let's dive under the hood. So what could a real 1964 Pontiac GTO actually do? Without secret 421 swaps, without backdoor tuning? The heart of the GTO was the 389 cubic inch V8. In base form, it made 325 horsepower. With the legendary tri-power carburetor setup, 3 two-barrels, it produced 348 horsepower and 428 pound-feet of torque. On the street, a stock GTO could sprint from 0 to 60 in about 7.7 seconds and cover the quarter mile in 15.7 at 92 miles per hour. Respectable, quick, but nowhere near the fantasy numbers car and driver printed. That's where Royal Pontiac came in. Their secret Bobcat packages turned GTOs into silent assassins. Factory. Cars with hidden fangs. The Bobcat tuning added 20 to 30 horsepower on its own without swapping the block. A properly tuned Bobcat GTO could run in the low 14s on street tires, a giant killer in 1964. Buyers could choose a 3-speed manual, a 2-speed automatic, or the coveted 4-speed manual. Add in heavy-duty shocks, sway bars, and limited slip. Differentials, and you had a street car that could embarrass almost anything short of a purpose-built racer. Side by side, the truth becomes clear. The showroom car was quick. The Royal Bobcat was lethal. But the car and driver test car? It was a ringer, an outlaw disguised as stock. And yet, deception or not, the GTO's spirit was real. It proved that power, performance, and attitude could be packaged for the everyman. That you didn't need a Ferrari to feel like a king of the road. What began as a corporate rebellion and a carefully staged lie became the foundation of America's muscle car era. And half a century later, the GTO still stands as the honest face of an era built on deception. From one deception came an entire era. The GTO lit a fire across Detroit. Ford answered with the Mustang GT. Chevrolet built the Chevelle SS. Dodge unleashed the Charger. The muscle car wars had begun, and there was no going back. The GTO became more than a car. It became a soundtrack to youth rebellion, a symbol of freedom, horsepower, and attitude. A rolling declaration that America was loud, fast, and unapologetic. Today, original 64 GTOs fetch anywhere from $30,000 to over $100,000. And the car and driver test car itself, the ringer that started it all, is considered priceless. In 2024, a 1964 GTO was discovered after sitting untouched in a barn since 1969. Even half a century later, the legend still waits to be rediscovered. And here lies the greatest irony. The car that began with a lie became the most honest expression of American automotive passion. The GTO was more than a car. It was rebellion in steel. It was deception turned into destiny. And it was proof that sometimes legends aren't born perfect. They're forged in risk, in rule-breaking, and in the roar of an engine that refused to be silenced. If you grew up with stories of muscle cars, if you've ever driven one, or if you've dreamed of it, share your story below. Because the legend of the GTO isn't just history, it's alive in every one of us who still believes that horsepower is freedom,